Hi, welcome to Banter and Beans. It's a new 1/2 hour series hosted by me, Pat McDonald, and by Ben Kinsley. Hello, Ben.
Hello.
Hello. We're just for transparency, we're both members of the board of directors of Campaign for Vermont. And part of what we're doing here will reflect on what Campaign for Vermont is interested in and is pursuing. Both Ben and I were former co-hosts of Vote for Vermont. We're doing this show to ask that question, what is brewing in Vermont? So here you go. We've got our coffee and we're ready to chat.
Yeah, we're taking the name literally.
Yes, exactly. I love coffee. I don't know about you, but everybody knows in state government, you better have the coffee ready while I show up.
Just hook up an IV.
So while while the legislature is in recess, it's our plan to keep you informed about the summer study committees, particularly like the pension benefits task force, which is very important and took over a lot of time, and as it should have, in the legislature this year. And any in-depth look at all of the bills that were passed into law, because I didn't see too much press on those bills, and you probably should know what the legislature is going to be expecting of you. So tonight, however, we are going to focus on a long-term economic plan that was introduced by Campaign for Vermont. Actually, it was introduced in 3 phases over the last couple of weeks. And we just put out a press release, which sort of summed it all up. Ben is our chief policy guru. So I'm going to ask him to go over all these phases. And I, of course, will butt in as I usually do. Phase 1 is called a shot in the arm, and you'll probably wonder what that is. Phase 2, the courtship. I like that one, Ben. And phase 3 is the long game. So I will turn it over to Ben. I was thinking if you could maybe summarize the press release first and talk about why we got started doing this in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, I drink my coffee.
Fair enough.
All right.
So the inspiration for this really was that looking at the legislative activity, and Campaign for Vermont follows the legislature. We're in committees all the time on a whole bunch of different issues, pretty wide range of issues. In fact, I'm struggling to think of another advocacy organization in the state that follows as diverse of a set of issues as Campaign for Vermont does. Everything from economic development to education funding and education policy to workforce development to voting issues and transparency issues in state government. So we're following a whole bunch of different issues, and one of the things that really struck us, I think, after the first, I'd say, 2 months of the legislative session, was that there was no uniform plan. There was a lot of committees doing a lot of work on a lot of different things, but no overarching plan of how to tie those ideas and that work that was happening in committee together into a cohesive vision and a cohesive strategy. And so we really felt like that was a missing piece. And we didn't see the legislature doing that. We didn't see the governor doing that. That's a role that often either the governor or a speaker of the House or a Senate pro tem or someone in a leadership position in the legislature or in the administration would take that on and say, here's the plan for this year. Here's the overarching goal. And especially in a time like this. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of things going on. They're trying to solve a lot of problems, both of the legislature and the administration. The administration is really focused on this vaccine rollout and making sure that we're getting people vaccinated and back to work and safe and healthy and all of that stuff. And that's an appropriate goal. But as we come out of this pandemic, we need to also be thinking not just the immediate needs, solving the immediate needs, but also solving the future needs, right? And where we're going to go in in a year, in 2 or 3 years, in 5 years? Like, where are we now? Where do we need to be? How do we start laying those groundwork pieces now to be where we need to be as we come out of this pandemic and start our economic recovery? And it's very clear to really anyone that looks at this that there's the economy of tomorrow is not going to look like the economy of yesterday, right? The economy coming out of COVID-19 and 6 months from now and a year from now is not going to be the economy we had, prior to the pandemic in January of last year. That's very clear. There's a lot of significant things that have changed, even habits that have changed, right? You think of what's changed in our own personal lives. We're probably not eating out as much, for example, getting takeout more often. Our own habits have changed, and the way that we work has changed. Everyone, for the most part that could, started working remotely. The economists who study this really closely feel like a significant number of those people are probably not going back to the office 100% of the time. In fact, the numbers indicate that as many as 30% of employees may be working either partly remote or full-time remote at the end of this year, and they may continue to do that for the foreseeable future. So there's really big shifts in the way that we work and the types of jobs, the industries that are thriving right now. They've all changed, and so that creates a lot of opportunities for a state like Vermont. And there's some strategies to work with that. So phase one is really phase one of the plan, which released today in its entirety. As Pat said, we've been rolling this out for the past 3-4 weeks in pieces. So each phase kind of individually. We released the full plan today. As of May 13th, we released the full plan in all 3 parts. Phase one really is looking at what businesses were most impacted by COVID-19, by the pandemic, and how do we get them at least back to self-sustaining. Most of those businesses have been hemorrhaging money for the last year. They've had to lay off employees. How do we at least get them back on a path towards being sustainable again, so that we don't continue to lose them? And the industries that were really hard hit were mostly service, retail, tourism, and a little bit of manufacturing, although most of the manufacturing has come back at this point. It's but the businesses that are really still struggling are food service, and tourism and retail.
Ben, I think I told you that I think I told you that we have to edit that out. I think I told you that a woman from an association who represents, okay, we'll start over. Hi. I think I told you that a woman who represents this association, I forget the name of it, but it represents tent companies and people that you may not think about when you're talking tourism and stuff, weddings, all these things that the rental spaces, rental equipment, they are like destroyed. It's not even survival mode. They're down for the count. And she was in begging for a relief from the legislature. And there are areas that I never even thought about.
Yeah.
You just know the ones that are in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's businesses we never would have thought of. We never could have targeted with a PPP loan or a bailout, or like that, because you just never would have thought of them. It's things like DJs, for example.
Yeah, there you go.
Like, what events have you had a DJ for in the last 18 months, right? So there's a lot of those scenarios out there. So phase one of the plan is how do we jumpstart those parts of our economy so that we stop losing these businesses and try to stabilize the ones that we still have. The most direct mechanism that we found of doing that is to focus on our tourism industry, trying to bring people back into the state. There's really good data that suggests there's pent-up demand for travel. And most people are going to be, and Vermont's close to major metropolitan areas, right? We're within driving distance of Boston, of Hartford, of New York City, all of these, Albany, New York, all of these major metropolitan areas, even Montreal, if and when the Canadian border reopens for leisure travel. So we're within the drive market of all these large metropolitan areas, and the data indicates that people are more comfortable and will likely be more comfortable for the foreseeable future driving to leisure destinations than they will fly.
Yeah. If I
there's a lot of
may, I
reasons
think
for that.
Joan, ACCD was testifying, and they said that even though these people are close and we're hoping to attract people from these areas, we're in competition with them because they want everybody else to come to their state. And
Yeah, because
some of
guess
them
what?
have a little more money than we do.
Yeah, New Hampshire, Maine, upstate New York, they're all doing this, right? They're all marketing to these people, and they have larger budgets than we do.
Yeah,
So,
right, exactly.
So one of the first recommendations we had to level the playing field. We need to better fund our tourism and marketing budget just so we can compete on that playing field, because 6-month window booking, so people that are booking 6 months and further out, are way up. Like, people are planning vacations, they're planning them further in advance. We knew this back in January. The data was showing this. So so really tap into that, get people here spending money, and that money goes directly to the businesses that were hardest hit during the pandemic. So that's kind of phase one. It's kind of a shot in the arm.
Let me just tell you that ACCD is looking, which I think is smart, is doing what you're saying, but looking regionally, because I don't know how many people realize it, but every section in Vermont, every region is different. They have different things to focus on. They have different things going on. Some are agricultural, some are more focused on towns, and so they're really, I hope, my concern is that we keep up the momentum. That's what I think they're starting out on the right foot, but it bothers me that, like that you said, that we're not really coordinated. An example of this, when you were talking before, House Economic Development worked almost the whole session on what we were calling a mini TIF. A lot of people testified. It was good. We were supporting it at Campaign for Vermont. And then Ways and Means came in and said, nope, we want it out because they were worried about some stuff. And here this committee went the whole legislative session. And as you said, nobody knew they were working on it. That's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because they could have been doing something else.
Well, they came in and torpedoed it at the last minute, and they were like, well, no, you know what? We're actually going to do something with regular TIFs to make them a little more accessible to medium-sized, still large towns. When you say medium-sized, I mean, like, I think Montpelier is medium-sized.
Well, if I can, I think they were pretty insulting to the smaller towns because they didn't think they had the capability. And I was really upset listening to them because in Berlin, if we knew we couldn't do it, you either hired somebody or you looked to the people in your town. Some of the people that I was mentioning. I mean, they're well known in state government and around, attorneys, people that could really help us, and they would come in and help us.
Yeah, and not to get too far off topic, but yeah, I mean, the Ways and Means Committee basically said to small towns, like, we don't trust you to manage infrastructure projects.
Yep.
And that's there's a lot of issues we could unpack there. But,
yes, there is, but maybe another show.
Maybe another show on that.
So
I think anyway. So phase one, the shot in the arm, not the COVID vaccine, although that's important as well. We need to do that to get people back and working. But it's to get dollars back into those industries that are hardest hit by the pandemic. Phase two is looking at the 2 to 3 year horizon. So like that tourism spending is great, but that's really going to be mostly this year and next year. We'll feel that impact. The intermediate stuff, what we can do in 2 to 3 years, we have all of these people that are that have come to Vermont and because they're urban refugees fleeing, some of the big cities when the pandemic happened. Our population, and no one really has a good number on this, to be honest. No one really has a good number, but it's fairly significant. Some municipalities are saying that their population has doubled in the past 18 months. And I don't doubt that, although we just don't have good data across the state. But we know that they're here. We just don't know how many there are. So in light of that, again, 30% of these people could end up staying, right, if they continue working remotely. And so we need to enable that to happen. We also need to enable our more rural parts of the state to thrive. For such a long time, we've seen all of the economic prosperity being driven out of urban centers like Chittenden County, Franklin County, Washington County, where more rural parts of the state have just struggled to compete. A major piece to that is access to high-speed internet, to broadband. It is increasingly important that we have high-speed broadband access across the state. Like it is just such a it's so necessary right now, and the pandemic more than anything has shown a light on existing problems and why it's so so important. It's the mom that has to work from home and watch her kids during the day because they're home from school, or they're not in school or in classroom because of the pandemic, or the kids that are trying to do their homework and can't because they don't have access to high-speed broadband, or they have to drive to Starbucks or McDonald's or Dunkin' Donuts or the town library and sit in the parking lot to connect to Wi-Fi. And that is just unacceptable that we don't have access. It is at this point, it is critical infrastructure. We need to have it. And fortunately, the legislature they passed a bill this past week that will start to address it. There's a couple problems with it, and we kind of pointed them out. First, there's no bridge. So it invests basically 100% of the federal dollars coming in into building out fiber networks, which is great. Fiber networks are a key piece of infrastructure for the future. There are some concerns around how expensive the cost per mile and cost per connection, because it could be cost prohibitive to build out into certain areas. Those are issues we can address, and there's new technologies like 5G and low orbit satellite internet that we can use to fill in some of those gaps. But really, the major issues that with the bill that the legislature has passed, and we kind of saw the writing on the wall as we were working on this paper, but the major issues are that there's no gap fill. So basically, it says you're out of luck if you don't have service now. You're out of luck until we can build fiber to you, and that could be 5 years from now. We don't know when that's going to be for some of these people. So that's a problem because there's no bridge. We're kind of leaving people stranded until we can get there with building physical infrastructure. We have tools available to us to fill those if we chose to use them. The legislature chose not to. So that's a problem. The other problem that we have is affordability. There's a really good study that was done for the Department of Public Service last year that showed one of the largest cost barriers now, or one of the largest barriers to access now, is cost, right? If the only service you have available to you is $100 a month to get internet service, there's going to be a significant number of people that aren't going to get connected simply because of the cost of it. And even if you do have access to a provider that has a low cost option like Comcast, Comcast and Consolidated both have a $10 a month plan. That's pretty good if you're on one of their networks. But the uptake rate on that, like this report looked at that and found that about 10 to 15% of people eligible for it actually apply because so few people know about it. So there's a real gap there. And I think that over the next couple of years, as we continue to build out infrastructure, we're going to see this barrier. The largest barrier to accessing broadband is going to be cost and not actual connections. And we're going to probably see that shift within the next 2 or 3 years, where we'll hit that tipping point of there's more people that are cost prohibited instead of actual physical infrastructure prohibited. And the bill that the legislature passed doesn't acknowledge that at all.
And I think a lot of these companies, they're into making money. That's sort of the bottom line. And when you've got one person up the hill 2 miles and there aren't other customers to make it worthwhile for the company, they struggle to put that link in. Could you talk a little bit about, speaking of link, of Starlink and how that's another alternative, and it's growing fast, that's for sure.
Yeah, so a great example of so when we're looking at this, there's a lot of federal money coming in, and most of that federal money is going to be directed at fiber build out, and that is, and I don't have any issue with that. I don't think anyone really has an issue with that, as long as we do it thoughtfully. One of the things that that we're looking at is the cost. So cost per connection of fiber right now is about in the parts of the state that we're talking about that are underserved right now, is about $3,000 per connection, so per household that you connect. So $3,000 for fiber, and that is likely to go up, to be honest, as we push further into rural areas. So that number is likely going to go up. But the point being is we have other technologies, for example, 4G, which is already deployed, and just about anywhere in the state you can get 4G coverage just about right now. And that 4G coverage, in most cases, you may need a booster antenna to reach this, but in most cases you can get 25 megabyte download speeds, which meets the federal minimum requirement for broadband speed. In fact, we could be doing this show right now on a 25 megabit connection if we wanted to. So that's just kind of an example. For most users, that's sufficient.
Starlink looks like it's got some edge on the cost from what I'm reading.
So Starlink is a new service that just launched, and it just came out of beta testing, so it's still not widely available yet, but it's likely to be widely available in the northern part of the United States by the end of the summer, is what most news outlets are reporting. So this so Starlink is a low orbit satellite. These satellites orbit much lower than most other traditional forms of communication satellites, which means that they have higher bandwidth, lower latency. So they can do things that previous generations communication satellites couldn't do, like video conferencing. And Starlink right now in beta phase, people are reporting 150 to 200 megabit download speeds, significantly faster. We're talking almost 10 times as fast as 4G, and probably twice as fast, maybe 3 times as fast as 5G, whenever that does get here as well. So there's this mix of new technologies out there. So, Starlink, 5G, 4G, that we could infill with if we needed to get to those really hard to reach places. Once you get down to like 3, 4, 5 houses per mile, it gets really cost prohibitive to build fiber, unless you want to start spending $10,000 per household. So
and just so you know, we have 2 or probably more, I don't know, we just know 2, Ben and I, 2 people that are beta testing the Starlink connection here that we know on the show, and we should check with them, see how it's going. I thought it was going pretty well. We had Mary Ebslin on the show, who's very knowledgeable about all this stuff, and her husband is one of the beta testers and seemed to like it.
Yeah, and it's not perfect, but it's getting better, and we'll really kind of know here probably pretty soon whether or not it's going to be a real long-term solution. But those are the types of things that we should leave the door open for, and the legislature didn't do that in the bill that they passed, which is kind of disappointing. And that's I think what they passed is good, but it could have been better. It's,
Yeah.
it's just a missed opportunity there.
Well, I think it's the first time that they've really done a comprehensive bill on broadband. So one step at a time, one baby step at a
One
time.
baby
They'll
step at a
figure it out.
time.
Yes, exactly. Let's
So
go on to number 3 here because of
yeah, so
time.
we're kind of starting to run out of time here. So we'll cover three, and phase three is some of the more traditional, kind of when you think about economic development, it's kind of some of the more traditional things you think of, like workforce development. And this is again so critical because of the shifts that are happening in our workforce. Like, so the types of jobs, the industries that are going to be the industries of the future. In a lot of ways, the pandemic just accelerated trends that were already happening, in which industries were going to succeed, which ones were not going to succeed, which ones are going to continue to grow, which ones are going to continue to contract. This just kind of accelerated a lot of the trends that were already happening. So it makes it really critical that we have a workforce development pipeline, and we'll come back to what that means here in a second. But really critical that we have a workforce development pipeline that is very clearly laid out, and addresses actual skills that are needed in our workforce. And this really dovetails well with the conversations that have been happening at the state colleges. They're really going through, over the past year, maybe even a year and a half, the state colleges have really been going through this soul searching exercise. And but it's important that it's not just the state colleges. We have to think about our high schools, what skills they're teaching, our technical education centers, what skills they are teaching, how those dovetail into CCV, Vermont Tech, Castleton, Northern Vermont University, what they're all doing, UVM, are all part of this dispersed workforce talent pipeline. But it's not really a pipeline right now. And that's the problem, is it's like these scattered silos of things that are happening. So I think, the Vermont State College system is doing some really great work in this area of trying to align their piece of it. What we need to do is make sure that those partnerships, those are aligned, that there's coordination with employers to make sure that the skills we're teaching, and that the skills that are required for the workforce as it's evolving are being met. And there are some examples of that happening, but it needs to be more comprehensive than it is right now.
I think I've told you this quite a few times over the years, but Switzerland and other countries like Austria, they have business people on their boards sitting there telling them what they need, and then they adjust accordingly. I'm thinking the colleges are going to have their hands full this summer, and I think they know it because they've got to coordinate it. And I was told years ago by somebody at VTC that the kids from high school who want to go on to VTC are several months, if not 6 months behind before VTC can kick into really teaching them the higher level stuff. So they've got to get that coordinated so the kids can, hit the ground running when they get to VTC.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not that every kid has to get a 4-year college degree. And that has been the mantra the last like 30 years, is you have to have you have to have a 4-year college degree. And the reality is, all of these people are graduating with 4-year degrees in things that we don't have jobs for. And so we need a little bit of shift in mentality and say it's okay to learn a trade skill. So that's an okay thing. Learn how to weld. You can make 6 figures with that skill pretty easily. Plumbers, electricians, like these are all things that are in demand now that you can make really good salaries right out of the gate, honestly. So we need to make sure that
and they're probably not going anywhere.
Well, yeah, and we need to make sure we're not stigmatizing that. If people want to pursue something in the trades, we shouldn't discourage them from doing that and force them to pursue, a college degree with that, they may not end up using.
Yeah.
The other really important thing, and there's some other things in phase 3, but the other really important one is housing, and I want to hit that before we have to wrap it up here.
Yeah.
Housing is really critical. We've had a housing crunch in Chittenden County for decades now, but now it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Every county, every town has a shortage of housing across the state. And believe it or not, there's actually some easy ways to address this. Everyone talks about how onerous like Act 250 and you have to get, it takes forever to get anything built. Turns out we actually have 7,000 structures, 7,000 buildings in Vermont right now that are considered uninhabitable because they've either just not been maintained or they haven't been zoned properly, or they're just abandoned. Those 7,000, and most of them are like, large Victorian homes. A lot of them are large Victorian homes that have just not been well maintained or whatever. They're not up to rental code, so the owners can't rent them. Those are an opportunity that are sitting there that we can, that they don't require all of the zoning and permitting that a full Act 250 process requires. They can get up to code faster. They can be usable faster than new construction. They also fit in they're also close to downtowns in most cases. They're in areas that people actually want to be in, all right, where there's things happening. They're usually also on major commuter routes, and so it's easy to get in and out of town. They're usually larger buildings, so that means you can subdivide them. So you could take one of these larger Victorian homes, subdivide it. You could get 2-3 units of housing out of a structure like that. So from a bang for your buck perspective, and from a how quickly we can increase our housing stock. And the other thing too that they also offer is they kind of maintain that the Vermont aesthetic of the character of a downtown, right? And it kind of renews that downtown vibrancy of some of our smaller towns. So reinvesting in those types of properties as opposed to new construction is a quick, easy way to get really good value and really good return on our housing dollars from a state perspective.
Hey, Ben,
ACC.
sorry, I don't know if you've been to the Berlin Mall recently, but they just built on the property a huge apartment complex, senior residence, but not it's just senior residence. And I figure what you're talking, the hospitals nearby, there's grocery stores, restaurants, and it's perfect there.
Yeah. And that's another trend that's happening, actually. Thank you for bringing that up, because that was another one we talk about in the paper, is that this is a new trend that's happening as well, is converting office space, former office buildings, into residential units. This is happening in Burlington and South Burlington, in Berlin. And this is probably a trend that's likely to continue, because as more and more people work from home, or at least work from home part-time, businesses have less need for office space. So why not turn some of that office space into residential units? It makes a lot of sense. And again, it's existing structures. You don't need to go through a full permitting process. You don't have to do a full new construction. You're just repurposing a structure that's already there.
I think the one thing we may have to do, as from living in Burlington, is the cost of rentals, because that's sky high. They got to do something about that. People can't afford even to rent.
Yeah, and that's true. And that's an issue. And there's a lot of really good people that are working on that issue, and have been working on it for a long time. I think that paradigm is going to shift a little bit, because as we start to attract more people in, middle class people into the state, because of the availability of remote work and, people who don't feel like they have to be tied to a city anymore. And they bring those, decent paying jobs with them. We may see the housing crunch starting to consolidate towards that middle level housing as opposed to lower level housing. Right. So there are issues there like gentrification and things like that. Not anything I don't think we can overcome, but I think that we're likely to see the nature of our housing crisis change over the next year or two. So that's something to be conscious of.
And do you know who's really working on housing? I know there's a lot of organizations, but we were mentioning before about there's no real plan or real effort to bring everybody together and to get it done. I didn't see it, so maybe I missed something.
Yeah, you're right. There's no necessarily universal coordinated effort. There's a lot of good projects happening here and there. And there's some really good stuff that the Department of Housing is working on. Josh
Okay.
Hannaford, who's the commissioner,
Yeah.
has some really good stuff. And he's looking at this issue specifically, actually, the one about
Good.
rehabbing existing buildings,
Yeah.
existing structures, is something that they are looking at. And so hopefully they get traction with that. And
Yeah.
we'll definitely be watching closely.
Because I remember when living in New York, if you lived in a loft in one of these old reconverted factory buildings or something, that was top drawer. That was amazing to
Yeah,
live in those
those are
things. So
cool. Those are cool
yeah,
places.
so we could create them here in Vermont.
Yeah,
That's
why
great. So
not?
what kind of time do we have left?
We are out of time, but
We're out of time. So let me say real quickly, we write us at banterandbeans@gmail.com. Anything you want to hear about, any comments or suggestions you have. We'll be busy this summer. And I was just realizing we've got to cover the college meetings as well, the trustee meetings, to see what's going on.
there's
Because
plenty to
and the
talk about.
pension, you all may not think the pension is going to impact you, but at $6 billion in liability, it's gonna come your way at one point.
Yeah,
So
it will.
anyway, thank you, Ben. Thank you
Thank you,
for
Pat.
joining us. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.